So this is a Web Development Meet attendee. I am your presenter. My name is Brian Lockwood. So there's a big picture of my dome, and I am the software development lead here at Benchmark Learning. I am also one of the trainers here, so the educators here at Benchmark Learning, teaching all the range of topics around .NET and web technologies. I am an MCT, so I'm a certified trainer. I'm also part of the MCT Advisory Council. There are 9 people in the world that are part of the Microsoft Council, and I'm one of the North American representatives for that. I'm also Australian, so hopefully you can understand me during this presentation. And I've been working in the web since roughly 1995-98, really kind of the inception of JavaScript as a kind of a language to interact with web pages. So I've been in the industry now for a while. So in this presentation, what I'd like to kind of identify is what you can expect. So we're going to have non-web versus web, and it's going to be a bout between what is better or what should we use. So the conversation that we're going to have here, and I really would like this to be as conversational as possible, is what is it really when we move content to the web or to the internet? If we have a Word document or a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet, what are our options when we do go to the web, and what does that really mean? We'll kind of discuss what you'll need to know. So if you do make that move, you've kind of seen all the indicators that really present to you the need to go to the web or to move to the internet. We'll kind of talk about what you need to know in order to do that and some of the skills that are tied to that. We'll look at some of the learning options here that we also offer. And then you could also use certain products to do certain jobs and then trying to balance between them. So you could use Excel to do something for your business, but is it really the right thing to do? Are you going to use use Dreamweaver or something to go to the web? Is it really the right thing to use for your business case? So those are the things that we're going to talk about today. You can expect in other webinars that we've done, as well as ones moving forward, that we might talk about more specific areas within web development as well. In the past at Benchmark Learning, we've run some webinars that we talk primarily about language, about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and how you actually interact with the web page. So this one is more focused on a broad sense of the web and why you'd want to kind of move to it. So before we get started here, I just want to do one last check just to make sure that I'm good to go. So I'll just check my recording session here, and if any of my moderators, actually anyone, can really give me a green check mark to let me know if you're able to hear me and see my screen. All I need is one check mark from someone, and that will tell me that everything is working. Perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and keep going. Then the last thing here is that we'll look at kind of the recognizable software that you can use to build web applications or websites. So here it is. We're just about to get started. This is the first slide of this session. So moving content to the web. When put in the right place, everyone can see it. That's one of the beautiful things about the web, right? As soon as you put it online, people around the world can see that content. So if you have a company document, for example, that you want some people, maybe your branch office in Australia, to be able to see, they're able to do that when it is on the web. Whereas what you might do today, or what you've done over the last couple of years, is emailing those files back and forth. Then you have to rely on those people having that certain piece of software in order to view those documents. Again, Microsoft Word is an example. Not everyone can read docx files, which is the extension of a Microsoft Word document. Whereas everyone's machines, by standard, need to be able to view websites. So that would be HTML. Right? You look at a Mac, you look at Windows, both of those operating systems have built-in browsers that allow you to view HTML files. Users don't need that special software, as we've just discussed. They don't need to have all those pieces of software on their machine to view those files. And even to that, going back to the users don't need special software, now you have to worry about versioning, right? So this has been an issue now for many years is, all right, I have a DOCX file, which is Office 2010. My users in Office 2007 can't read those. Possibly. I'm not an Office specialist, but I do know that there are different versions of extensions out there. Now, with the advent of smartphones or these mobile devices that can access the web, we now have a lot of people accessing content or needing to read content on the mobile device. And by putting it in an HTML file, so putting it on the web, everyone can view it. Right? So if you've got an Android or an iPhone, even a BlackBerry, tablet PC, everyone can read that file. Now this is kind of the unique part about web. So Word documents and Excel documents and even PDFs really don't have a lot of interaction. So you can't really say, hi, my name is Brian, and have the content say, hi, Brian, here's what you can do. Right, so you interact with, and the content changes based on who you are. Right, so websites can do that, whereas these static documents cannot. And with that, there are many hosting options. So you could host it in the cloud, you could host it with some hosting providers like GoDaddy, if you've heard of that, or Network Solutions. You could host it in your company intranet. You could host it in SharePoint. So there are many pieces of software that actually their job is to manage documents. So if you have an organization where you have documents and you're emailing it back and forth, that is somewhat of the past, right? Or at least you should be looking at it that way, right? You should never need to email an attachment to someone. What you could do is email a link of where that file is located or where that web page is so that they can interact with it and they can have custom content based on who is reading it. So SharePoint is a dedicated piece of software that you could use to host documents on the web. So what you'll need to know, if you are going to move your documents, let's say you've got your Word documents, you've got your PDF documents, and you want to go and move this content now to the web. So everyone can see it. You've set up some permissions where certain people with certain rights can actually view that content. If you're the one building that, moving that content, you're going to have to know HTML, right? So it's not the hamburger text markup language. It's the hypertext markup language, and it has these triangle braces and forward slashes that really define it. The good news is there are some tools that will actually write this for you. So if you're used to dragging and dropping images or writing text into Word or adding cells into an Excel spreadsheet, there are tools that you can actually just say save as and then save as HTML, and it will write all of this code or markup, is that what we'd like to say, into an HTML file that you then upload to your website. The other thing that you will need to know, there are 3 things in total. The second one is CSS. HTML alone is a pretty hideous presentation by itself. It's a structural language. So if you have content like think of a body of an email, right? So that's what I consider content, text and pictures. If you want it to look the way that you want it to look, that's CSS. If you want it to just be there or not, that's HTML. So it's structural. Think of a building being constructed. That would be your HTML. When you start to paint it and put certain doors on with certain accessories, that's just CSS. And then lastly, there's JavaScript. So JavaScript is how you interact with your users. So I actually get a lot of questions about this. People will say, hey, I just need a really simple website. I just need something really simple that will just show me some products and has a price. You know what? There's something else really simple. Can you have it so that they can put in their credit card and it pays my bank account? Or just something real simple? Well, it's not that simple, and it's actually rather complex. But in order to have any interaction with the user, you need JavaScript, which is a coding language like you would hear of Java or .NET or VBScript. This is along the same lines, along the same category, right? Ruby on Rails is another language. But these are the three things that you have to know to go and work in the web. You could get away with these first two, right? You could get away just knowing some HTML and some CSS. Because if your documents are just static documents that don't need to change based on who the user is, then these two should be just fine. But as soon as you want users to interact with your content, that's where JavaScript comes in. So I'm just going to take a quick little detour back to the chat window here to see if we've got any questions. So does anyone have any questions that you want to post in the chat window? And if you do, go ahead and put that in there, and I'll come back and review that here in just a moment. So I'm going to show you some some HTML and CSS here at the end of the presentation. So I will actually open up a programming tool to show you how to build a website. But this is primarily around kind of why I'd want to move to the web in the first place. Now, there are courses, obviously. This is a Benchmark Learning sponsored free event. So, of course, there are things that we can offer you here at Benchmark Learning. So we do offer HTML programming course, which is the 109.53. There's just an intro course, which is a little bit more introductory than the other one. There's also a jQuery's fundamental course. And we offer what's called Learn Blocks. So if you don't have enough time to take out 3 days to go to training, we offer Learn Blocks that we can come half a day or a day and really specify the topics you want to learn. So we do all offer that here at Benchmark. Now the other thing though is you do have other learning opportunities. And I'm not worried about losing business from Benchmark, because I'm going to give you these tools, you're going to inspect them and come back better educated to really kind of narrow in on what you'd like to learn. So there's actually two more places that I'm going to show you here in just a moment. One is JQ Fundamentals. If you're the type of person that wants interactive documents, then this website talks about a language called jQuery, but it has a fantastic, probably the best, the well-written JavaScript module or chapter that I've ever seen in any course that I've taught. So JQ Fundamentals, let me go and open that up here. So here is the website for JQ Fundamental, and in here they have something called JavaScript Basics. All right, and the way that this has been written is extremely helpful for people who are new to programming. In fact, some people who go into .NET programming, I encourage them to go through these steps first, because it gives them the basics, the building blocks to really begin in any type of programming language. So remember, JavaScript is used so you can interact with your users, show them content based on who they are, and also kind of interact with how they click buttons, how they move things around the screen. That's all JavaScript. The next one that I'm going to show you here on the slide deck is something called Don't Fear the Internet. Now there is some vulgar language in this, so I want to put a little red asterisk next to this website, but there's not a lot. It's one or two words, but they do a fantastic job going through the basics of web development or working in the web and moving to the web. So I would highly recommend that if you're in this webinar, you should go through these series of 7 videos. They're about 10 minutes long, and they're very well put together. So don'tfeartheinternet.com. So that would be the last learning resource that I could give you for now. Now there are plenty more. In fact, there's a website called w3schools.com that you could go to and do practice examples and really interact, and it teaches you in a very kind of fluent way. Now, a lot of these are offered at some place called Benchmark Learning, so we do offer some of these training options. Now, this is what I like to call kind of the you could use chapter, or the you could use slide. All right, so you could use Word and Excel to create your documents for the business. All right, this is where you put in the but, right? But what are your limitations? Your limitations are your users need to have that software in order to view it and interact with it. You need to have and own that software. You need to have a place to put it, whether it be a shared drive, an FTP, or you're attaching it via email. But even if you do those things, you then have to manage multiple versions of those things. So if you have a Word document that you're collaborating with in a team, you're emailing back different versions of that document. Right? So you could use Word and Excel. You could use HTML and JavaScript to build content for your organization or for someone, but you really have to have good reasons to do so. All right, so HTML and JavaScript have great advantages, and we've talked about what those are, but it requires someone to know HTML. It requires someone to know JavaScript, and sometimes those resources can be scarce. What's interesting is about probably 5 to 7 years ago, it was the job of a developer to know JavaScript. And just over the last kind of 3-ish years, it's kind of transitioned where now designers are required to know JavaScript. So it's kind of, it's morphed where it's more of a melding of the two roles that would need to know a programming language. You look at any job posting out there today, and it's going to show that if you're a designer, if you're a content specialist, if you're a learning specialist, whatever it is, that you will actually need to know some JavaScript. Not a lot, but at least some to get by. Think of anything when you go to build it. If it requires a button, if it requires selecting a value from a drop-down list, any of those features require you to know JavaScript. You could use MS Access, right? So Microsoft Access. You said, hey, guess what? I have a database, and I'd like to store all of my products in a database. So I've created this Microsoft Access database, has all my stuff in it. The problem is, so Microsoft Access, but it's difficult to manage. Again, the skills, where is that database accessible from? If you move to the web, you can have it in a central location and then have your website access that database or access SQL Server. So MS Access alone really isn't, and doesn't give you the ability to collaborate as much as what you would be able to do if you move things to the web. So then people come out and they say, all right, we're going to do some PDFs, right? So we'll make all of our files available in PDF. Right? You could use PDFs, but again, you're sending an email via an attachment. You're relying on someone to have a reader, which more than likely they will for a PDF file. PDFs are great for printing, but they don't really allow you to interact with the user very easily. Now, Adobe Acrobat actually does allow you to submit fields and send it via email, but even then you need those skills. Right? Whereas if you put it on the web, you can maintain it in one place. And let's say you've done a typo in your content, and you set it up as a PDF. You sent it out to all of your users, all of your potential clients, and you've made a typo, and you said, oh, crap, I need to send that out again. Right? So you send the new version out with the typo fixed. If you'd had that in the web, if you'd created a web page for that, you just go to the one place where that web page is stored, that users are then navigating to. In fact, I could draw this pretty easily in here. So if you have a web page sitting somewhere where everyone can access it, right? So you've got a server. All of your users are then accessing it at that location. So when you need to make an update to the content, maybe add a line, these users are still viewing that same place. Whereas when you're using PDF files, or even really any type of file, Word or Excel files, those users have each a copy of each version that you then sent them. They have to delete their trash, etc. So these are kind of reasons why you'd want to move to the web, because it's a centrally located central repository of where your changes are. So let me kind of go back to the Elluminate session here. It looks like no one has any questions yet, so I'll just keep on going. Now, we've kind of given you some reasons of why you want to move to the web. We've given you some reasons why you might want to stop what you're doing, giving attachments and emails, putting it on a shared drive, all that kind of stuff. And now we're at the point where we want to build it, right? So we're now ready to kind of build some web pages. How do we do it? There's a product by Adobe called Dreamweaver that you can just, it is very much like a Word style window, right? You type your text, you add your images, it's all visual, and you never ever see the HTML that actually drives that page. Visual Studio is another tool that will do that. Microsoft Word can do it, but you need to be careful. It adds a whole lot of extra stuff that might slow down your page or maybe even make it incompatible for some browsers to read it. So Microsoft Word can save documents as an HTML, but be a little bit careful. In other words, before you send it out to the masses, run a couple of tests first to see if it actually works. And there's a new tool by Microsoft that is more of a kind of a designer style tool. It's pretty much Microsoft's equivalent of Dreamweaver, so it's called Expression Web. And if you really want to get out there and learn some HTML, you could write it all manually in a program like Notepad++. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to do it in Notepad, but Notepad++ just gives you a little bit more features. So the answer to your question, if you have this, is can I build web pages without any of these products? The answer is yes. You can open up Notepad. Now, do you have the skills and the competencies to understand the language enough to make it actually function? And we have about one more slide here before I jump into some examples. But this is one thing that I really try to urge all of my students is don't use a technology for the sake of a technology. Too many people get boxed in and are biased to a certain organization, or actually biased against a certain organization when it comes to providing a solution to a problem. So always use the right tool for the right job. So I am a Microsoft certified trainer, but I also teach Adobe's ActionScript, right? Because that is an alternative to your other web technologies, is ActionScript and Flash and Silverlight. So always use the right tool for the job. Now what might be a little bit challenging at first if you're getting into this stuff is, well, how do I know which one is the best choice? And really how you'll know is through research, and not by one of your friends or colleagues saying, well, I hate Microsoft, so I'm not going to use their stuff. Right? So always use the right tool for the job, not because of what's hot at this point. So make sure you're satisfying the needs of the business and not just creating a web page for the sake of creating a web page. In fact, one of my first questions to people who, when they say they want a web page, is, why do you want a web page? And sometimes I'll say, well, because everyone else has a web page, I want a web page, right? So, or the answer might be, I want a web page because I feel like having a web page gives me the reputation that I'm legit, right? That I'm actually a legitimate business, right? Because I don't want to use my rudeword@yahoo.com email address for my business, right? I want to create a website and then have some emails that are tied to that. So what I'm going to do here is just for my last little bit is take a look at just how you'd actually go about creating a web page, and then we can kind of open the floor up for some questions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up Notepad. All right, so let me make sure that you can all still see here. So can you all see? All I need is one person to say that they can see my Notepad window. Good, thank you, Carolyn. And I'll go ahead now and show you some things. So you want to get into web development, remember there are 3 things you have to know. 2 you can get by with, HTML and CSS. Let me beef up the font here so you can see it. So a web page is made up of some of these these braces and forward slashes. So you might look at HTML and see something like this, right? That's an HTML document. But you really need to truly understand what that's actually doing, right? Because when you're actually in the web page, you want it to say welcome, All right, my name is Brian. So that's actually what you want it to display. So browsers, what browsers do is browsers can actually read and interpret all of those braces, those triangle braces and forward slashes, and manipulate that to present it to the user in a readable way. So if you look at this, you've got to look at your context of your stuff, right? The context of the information in the document you're trying to provide your users. In other words, this one is a header, right? This is the body or the main content of what I'm trying to kind of give across to my users. Now, unfortunately, this is an HTML, so we have to make it in an HTML way. So a header in HTML is actually defined with an H1, for example. And whatever you open, you have to close. So it's a very well-mannered language. For my body, maybe I want to go in here and say this is going to be a paragraph. Again, it's a well-managed language, so I close it with a paragraph. So you have to think of the context of the information, right? What is a header? What is a paragraph? What is a footer? What is all this stuff, right? So we could go ahead and try it like this, but unfortunately this isn't valid HTML. What we need to do in order to make it valid HTML is to say, well, there is HTML, and within inside of HTML is all of this stuff. And what I mean by inside is everything inside of here is then kind of flagged as HTML. But even then, I need a little bit more work, right? Because this is really the body of my web page, right? What I want people to see. So I need to add in another one here called body. And what I'm doing is I'm writing a language, a markup language, that your browsers, Safari, your mobile device, your Android browser, your Internet Explorer, your Google Chrome, I'm telling these browsers how I want this thing rendered or presented to my users. And believe it or not, I'm actually done. Right? That's the basics of a web page. So I'll go ahead and I'll say Save As here. I'll throw it on my desktop as a file called intro2web.html. And what I'll do is I'll save this and open it back up in the browser. Right? So I'll go to my browser and I will say here, go to my desktop and open up this file. All right, so there it is. So it may be a little bit small on your screen if you have this on the projector, but it says welcome, and notice the font size here. The font size of welcome is a lot bigger than the font size of my name is Brian. Right there it is. And it does that because the browser has interpreted this HTML and said, ooh, an H1 means that you're some form of a title. Right, so I could put in here and I could put maybe the H3, which is a third level of a title. And I could say benchmark learning rules. I would identify that text with a kind of the H3 header, and I'll go ahead now and refresh this window. And notice that it does give me the content. It doesn't give me any of these braces or anything. But it does in fact give me a different font size because I'm telling my browser, hey, these words are level 1, these words are level 2, and this is just a regular paragraph. So there's much more to that, right? Remember I told you that there's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the foundations. If you want to be a designer or a developer, you will need those skills. No matter what job role you're in, you have to know those skills. So HTML is very structural, right? It doesn't really give you a lot of kind of opportunity to change the design. So the language that you can use is CSS. Remember, CSS makes things pretty. HTML is structural. So what you could do is you could say, excuse me, H1, I'm going to tell you that you're going to be a different color. And by putting this style in here, that's CSS, cascading style sheets, this here, inside of here, is now considered CSS. So I could say color, and I'll make it orange. Now I know CSS, so I know that this is a valid property called color, and I know that orange is a valid color, a valid value of that property. So you do need to have those skills to know what you can do. But there's plenty of resources out there that can give you that information. Right? You could take a course here at Benchmark, both local and remote. We have students all around the world taking our classes. Right? Where sometimes some of our classes just have students who are remoting in from home or from the office. Or you could learn online, right? JQ Fundamentals, w3schools.com, Don't Fear the Internet. All these places are places you could learn. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll say that the H1 has a style where the color is orange. Now, I don't need you to understand the language, right? In this presentation, it's just an introductory presentation of web development. So I just want to show you what's possible. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this now, and notice then it changes color. Right? So using CSS, we can really manipulate this quite easily. So let me kind of go back to my presentation here and see if you have any questions at all. So let me open the floor up for questions so far, or maybe some things that you have comments about. No questions or comments? All right, Mary, what is your question? If you want to type that into the chat window there, I can make sure we address that. Oh, yep. So actually, Norma has a question here that is a valid statement to a valid comment. Eclipse is another tool that you can use. There are actually over 50 different tools that you could use to create web pages. Eclipse is one of them. Eclipse can be used. It's more of a plug-in environment where you can plug in modules that allow you to develop web pages for Android. It's primarily a Java-based tool. So Eclipse is another tool, and if anyone else has any other suggestions of other tools out there, you can go ahead and write that into the chat window as well. But all of these tools, no matter what you use, generate HTML. That's what they do. That's their job, right? It allows the user to drag and drop, type some stuff, add images, even add functionality, but in the end, it renders to the user as HTML. It generates an HTML file. So Mary's question here is how does JavaScript fit in? CSS fits inside of HTML code. Does JavaScript do the same? Great question, and you know what? The best way to explain this is with that same file. All right, so here's that same file. What I'd like to do is maybe have a button that when it is clicked, it says hello to me, right? So what I'd like to do here is add in a button. Now again, keep in mind that these are the things that I do know already. I have some of these skills. I'll do my best to explain along the way. One of the HTML elements, and an element is considered one of these things, to create a button is called the input element. But when it sits alone, it really doesn't know what it is, what type of input it is, right? Because there are many types of input you can receive from your users. You can have checkboxes, radio buttons, you can have text, you can have just regular buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say type is text, right? It is a text. Actually, sorry, my fault here. I'm actually want a button, right? Because when I click it, I want it to do something. I want it to say hi. And what I like to do here is give it a value. This is going to be what it shows inside the text of the button. And I'll say here, say g'day. So I'll save this file just as it is. No JavaScript in here right now. All right, just to show you what this would do, I'll refresh my page. You see here it says say g'day. and it doesn't do anything when I click on it. So where JavaScript fits in here is anytime you have a button, a text box, a checkbox, any of those things, you want it to email, you want it to search, you want it to sort, any of that stuff, that's all JavaScript. Right? It's interaction with your user. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to the top, and there's a section up here called the head section. All the stuff that's in the head section cannot be seen by the user. It's kind of the background stuff that's available. It's like the resources. All the stuff inside of the body is all the presentation, what the user can see. So what I'm going to do is inside of the head here is I'm going to type in some JavaScript. But in order to have JavaScript, I need a script element. So it's kind of getting a little confusing at this point. But let's just back up for a second. We have some HTML. When a button is clicked, we want it to do something. There are some things that need to get done in order for that to work, and that's what I'm doing here. So let me just wire this up. And this HTML is actually, you can find this online very easily. But I do need to say, I'm going to write some JavaScript. It's going to be one of the resources of the head section. And then in my body, I want to be able to access that. Now, the speed that I need to go through for a webinar, I won't be able to sit and obviously do what I do in a classroom environment where I'd have the students follow along. Right? So please bear with me while we go through this in a webinar setting. So what I do in class is I'd say, hey, I need something that's reusable, something that I can kind of call to tell what to do. All right, so I'll say here, say hello. And this then begins the language called JavaScript. So remember, you can build websites without doing any of this stuff. But as soon as you need it to interact with the user, that's where you need to learn this language. In other words, what is a function? What is this? What is the open and closed parentheses? What is the curly braces? What are the semicolons? Right? There are things you have to learn in JavaScript. But what I'm going to do here is just say hello. Right? So I'll just say g'day. And what this will do is I'm using a built-in thing into the web that will prompt me with a little dialog window that says g'day. All right, that's all it will do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go then and use this JavaScript within my button. And I'm going to say when this button is clicked, go ahead and say hello. All right, so it's going to say when the button is clicked, go ahead to this thing that I built, this resource, and do this. So let's see if this works. Now, in any presentation, there are experiments and there are demos. Right? Demos will always work. Experiments may fail for some reason. Experiments may fail because the presenter didn't set up something that they should have, etc. So we are going to call this, my friends, an experiment to make sure that we know what I've been doing. So I'm going to refresh this. And now it should be ready with that say g'day. So I'll click on this and notice that I've now interacted with my user and I have a g'day. Right? We can add many other things to this. We could change words on the web page. We could change the title. Maybe when they come to the web page for the first time, we say hello. Right? There are many things that we can do, but that's how JavaScript can essentially plug in to your existing HTML. Is through what are called events, right? On click, when someone clicks something, on select, on text change. So if you have a text box and you want, as soon as someone types some letters, that things start to happen, right? So these are events, and that's how you can tie in some JavaScript. So I'm going to minimize this just a little bit more, just to get this to view on a single page here. And we can open the floor to some more questions, or maybe a follow-up from Mary as well. So Of course, there's a lot to learn. I've been programming now, or I've been working in the web since roughly '98 professionally. So you got to figure that's 14 years of work just typing HTML. So I'm very comfortable in this language, and which is why it's easy to kind of go through and say this is CSS, this is JavaScript, this is HTML. But there are always hidden rules of why things work and why things don't. For example, one of the things in my courses is someone might do this, where they'll just forget the /. Right, so what I did, just so everyone sees this, notice where my cursor is right now. I'll just show you where I am right now. All right, there it is. For it to work, you need the / because it's a well-mannered language, right? You open a script element, you need to close it. So a very common error in my class is someone will forget to put a /. That will break your web page. So it is a very kind of touchy language where if you don't do it properly, it will be painful for you. You just have to kind of knuckle it out. And there are tools that will help you kind of avoid these issues. So obviously I'm typing this in Notepad, but think tools like Dreamweaver, Eclipse, thank you Norma, and Visual Studio and all these other tools, they would actually help write the HTML and you wouldn't have those issues. So another question here from Mary. First of all, thank you, Mary. Interaction in these presentations is key. So this is great for us. So the question from Mary is, any recommended books or for all the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? And this is kind of where I'm a little bit, I might be the wrong person to ask. The way that I learn is via web pages online, kind of for the same reasons that I spoke about in the beginning, as the books can become very quickly out of date. So having it online and reading reviews and comments and posts and instructions online, it, for me, works a lot better. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of books. And I know that's sometimes shocking, but the three here, W3 Schools, and I'll put a link here, .com, is a fantastic place to go. And in fact, we have about a couple more minutes here, and I'll just show you how you can go and learn. Because one of the other things is my students will say, there's so much to learn. I don't know what I don't know. And so when you go and search online, if you typed in how to program in HTML or what is HTML, right, you're going to get millions of results. So let me go ahead and just show you here what I would do. All right, so here's w3schools.com. And I'm new to HTML. On the left-hand side here, they have tutorials and also references of how to do this stuff. So I'm going to go over to Learn HTML on the left-hand side here. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And click Learn HTML. And it works through tutorials that you can actually test live. Because that's the other problem with books, is you can read them until your eyes go blue, or whatever the term here in America is. But applying it is key. You know, if you read markup for the first time, I guarantee you will not remember that when you actually go do the work. So again, this is why working online or working with resources available to you through the internet is key. So look at this. If this first step, right? Notice they have all the basics here, right? All the things that you can use. And you can go to here and say, all right, looks like they've got a HTML, a body, an H1, a paragraph, very similar to what I've just done. And they have a button here called Try Yourself. So the really fun part about the w3schools.com is that you can actually change inside the left margin here. And it will update on the right-hand side. So you can actually type HTML here and see what your results are instantaneously. So W3 Schools is probably one of the best resources to get started. Again, I think that students get more out of a course when they're better educated coming into it. So I would say, hey, before even taking a course, try some of these things. And more than likely when you do register, because you probably will register for some form of a course, whether it be with us or someone else, that you will be better educated to know what questions to ask. And you'll say things like, hey, is it good practice too? And then the instructor, the person in front of you, has years of experience and they can give you recommendations. All right, so that's one of the advantages, again, to coming to a course. But I would say, Mary, hopefully, again, I don't have a lot of books, but what I do is, if there are anyone else in this session that can recommend any books that you've read that's worked for you for any of those topics, if you could post those into the chat window. But I use W3 Schools a lot. The JQ Fundamentals, as well as Don't Fear the Internet, would be 3 fantastic resources to use just to get started. You know, it looks like when I was moving my cursor over to the Blackboard window, I may have closed a question, and I think it was from Corey. So if there is a Corey in here, which there is, if you had that question, I'm sorry, but I accidentally closed that chat window. If you want to type that question again, you can do that. Or if anyone else has any other questions, please let me know. I'll just take a little pause here to give you time to digest. Oh, okay, fantastic. Great series of questions here. So Corey says, what are the most web pages today coded in? Where does XML come in? So the first part of this is every single web page you see, no matter what it is programmed in other words, if you've heard of terms like PHP, Ruby on Rails, ASP.NET, Java, if you've heard of any of those terms, in the end, they will render as HTML. That's what those tools do. They're called a server-side language, and they will actually, in the end, when the user is finally viewing their web page, the user will view it in HTML. That's the job of those server-side languages, is to render, or to generate HTML on your behalf. So many tools. So I can't say what are most web pages programmed in, because so many people use so many different products. But in the end, it's all HTML. I personally use Visual Studio because I program in C#. Because I build applications that require interaction. People want to sell products. I can build those systems. E-commerce. So I use Visual Studio because I'm a .NET programmer. But Norman has a good point about Eclipse, right? So Eclipse is your PHP and your Java. In the end, you write in the Java language, but it renders as HTML. XML. So your question about XML. Let me draw a little picture here. XML is basically the same thing as HTML. In fact, HTML is a derivative of XML. And we actually teach an Intro to XML course that I highly recommend to everyone who's going to be working on the web. Is a meta language. In other words, by itself it can do certain things, but a lot of markup languages are now derived from XML. So all of the things where you have well-formed XML, where you have an open element and you have a closed element, the /, those same rules apply to HTML because it's a derivative of XML. There's a thing called XAML, XAML. So if you've worked with WPF or Silverlight, right, it's a derivative of XML. I think Apple iOS, I could be wrong with this, so take this with a grain of salt, but I know Android has a markup language very similar to XAML from Microsoft that you can build Android applications in, and that is also a derivative of XML. So all the same rules that you have in XML are now applied to HTML and these other languages. It's just a way to structure content. So I talked about that earlier, right? So we had a header and some body content. Alone, that really doesn't give you a context of that information. If you're not sure what I'm talking about here, what I'm saying is if you have, let's say you even have Blockwood at benchmarklearning.com. You have G'day, and you have I would like to buy you a beer. Right? If this was your document that you're presenting, that you're trying to give to your users, by itself it has no context. Right? So is just text. This is just text, and this is just text. So what XML allows you to do, i.e. HTML, XAML, MAML, all these other languages, is it allows you to give a context of what that is. So in other words, you could say this is the email. This is maybe the subject. And this could be the body, right? So it allows you to take flat information and present it in a hierarchical way. That's what XML does, right? So now I've given a context where now systems who read this know which part is the email, which part is the title or subject, and which part is all of the content, right? So it just allows you to identify the context of the information in the document. Does that answer your question, Corey? Julie has another good question here. So the question is, what is the difference between HTML and HTML5? And the answer is just new stuff. Right? So if you think of a library, right? So you go to the library and you can use all of these books. If you have an old public library, you have old books normally. If you have a new public library, usually they'll either get books in from another library or they'll actually purchase new books. And when you have new books, you have new information, new ways to do things. HTML is the same. So for example, where I used, I don't have my document open. Let me open up my document again. Open with Notepad. There we go. Where I have this document, right now this is considered HTML1 because I haven't told it what version of HTML I'm using. But if I type in this, it's called doctype. This is like saying the version of this file that I'm using, the version of HTML that I'm using, is HTML5. You'd think it would say something like this, but it is actually just HTML. So by adding this to the top of this file, I've now made this valid HTML5 page. But as soon as I do that, now I have other options. So there's a new type of control called an email control. Believe it or not, that actually didn't exist before. Right? There's a new type of control called a search control. Believe it or not, that didn't exist either. So there are these new controls, these new elements that I can use when I use the new version of HTML. If I left it as HTML1 and tried to do this, it wouldn't know what to do. Right? And my page might even break in some browsers. But as soon as I say that it's HTML5, then I can go and do these things. So notice here, this the one that I've just added. Notice here that it is of type search. Therefore, automatically when I start typing it, it gives me a way to clear out that result. So it's not a text box, it's a search box. And this element did not exist before HTML5. So just new ones. So you can actually go online and look at again, W3 Schools is another great place. You can say learn HTML5, and in here they have the list of the new elements, and then the new things that you can do. Some of the other new things that you can do in HTML5, which isn't really new HTML5, it's actually new JavaScript things that you can do, new CSS things that you can do. You can do things like geolocation. So you want to create a website that finds the longitude and latitude of your users so you can map them out on a Google map on your web page. Right? You can do that now with HTML5. You could not do that as native HTML in HTML4 and below. Right? You could use other services like Google can offer that service, and they do it all in their way. But natively that wasn't supported, and that now is today with HTML5. Exactly. So Mary says, so HTML5 recognizes all HTML1 elements, but not vice versa. That is correct to my knowledge. I have to be very careful of how I answer this. To my knowledge, because HTML5 is not officially released as a release product, it's still kind of in beta, if you want to put it that way. I believe that it is backwards compatible. And so far in all of my sites that I've built in HTML5, which is so far a couple, that is true. So to my knowledge, you won't need to worry about that. So we have a question here from Corey again. Do you think that changes since then will be easy for him to catch up? So he went to school, and some of the changes that have come into play, do I think that that would be easy transition? I think relatively, yes. For example, when I was in college, I did some web development in high school, and it was actually one of the primary ways that I got through kind of high school and colleges doing web pages. And when I went to college, I went for a combo of web development and network infrastructure. So I have my MCSE, I was an IT coordinator, I ran all the hardware for one of the major consulting companies here in Minnesota, but I hadn't programmed in a while. So it was about 5 years or so that I actually really kind of remembered my core programming language, my object-oriented stuff. And so coming back into it, I did have to learn the new languages, but I had the basics of, okay, I know what a variable is, I know what an if statement is, I know some of these basic things, and by having that as a kind of up my sleeve, it was a little bit easier for me to transition than someone who is brand new, because the minds are very different in how they like to move forward. So we have about 2 more minutes here, so I'll answer maybe these final questions here, and then so Kay, I'll answer yours when that comes through, and then we'll kind of have to wrap things up. Let's see here. So Julie has a question of what kind of issues do you run into across different browsers, and what are the best ways to handle these issues? I have a T-shirt that says IE is my kryptonite, and I have that because browsers and different vendors of browsers are a pain in the A, right? So as a web developer, it is very challenging to create websites that are consistent across all browsers. In fact, that's actually why Flash and Silverlight have been very successful in the past, is because you develop one way and it's kind of standardized across any browser that has that plugin installed. So how do I handle cross-browser issues? I actually use a template, believe it or not. There's a website out there called HTML5boilerplate.com. And it has no content inside of it, as far as it doesn't have any text, it doesn't have any pictures or anything. But what it does is it gives you, it resets all the CSS to a standard value, because sometimes browsers like Chrome and Firefox think of padding. The default padding in Microsoft Internet Explorer is something like 5 or 10. The default padding in Chrome is something like 0 or 5, right? So these browsers have different default values for the padding and other settings inside of it. So what Julie's saying is, well, since all of these browsers have all these different default settings, how am I supposed to build a web page that's going to look the same and act the same across all these browsers? So what I do is I use this template that resets everything to be the same value, clears them all out, and then allows me to start from scratch. So that's what I use to allow things to be consistent. Now it's not going to be the whole encompassing answer, but it definitely helps a tremendous amount for when we go and build web applications and websites that allow us to have it look and feel the same in all browsers. In fact, there used to be a script called reset.css. Now it's called normalize.css, and that's found in the HTML5 boilerplate example. All right, so I'm looking for more questions. It doesn't look like there are any more. What you can do, though, is we do offer, again, many of these classes. Some of them I teach. Some of the other professionals teach here. But we do have a fantastic team, and you can go ahead and contact the sales advisor, the education advisor that maybe signed you up to this webinar today, and they can maybe get you connected with either myself or some of the other professionals that we work with in our industry, and kind of get your questions answered. So those are probably the best people to kind of start with, and then they can help direct you from there. But hopefully this webinar has been kind of useful for you, and I hope that it went well. Again, my name is Brian Lockwood. Again, that is my shiny dome. And I work here at Benchmark Learning as an educator and software development lead. I do have a blog out there if you're interested in a read, and my Twitter handle is Aussie. So thank you so much for coming and attending this webinar. Hopefully you're all giving high fives and saying how wonderful it was, and that you have a fantastic rest of the afternoon. All right, great. Well, again, we will talk to you sometime soon, and have a fantastic day. Stephanie, what was your question? Okay, all right, no worries. Cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Again, you can go ahead and contact your education advisor, and have a great day.